As we drift into tonight's story, imagine the kingdom of Valeria, bathed in the calm of a cool starlit night. It is the night of the Moonlit Festival, a time of laughter, music, and warm bonfires. But while the kingdom celebrates, Princess Lyra finds herself drawn to the quiet of the palace gardens, where shadows hold secrets, and a golden feather hidden beneath the grass awaits her touch. This feather, mysterious and radiant, whispers of a journey, one that will lift her beyond the world she knows, revealing a hidden darkness at the edge of her realm. So, let your mind wander with her into the night as we begin the tale of Princess Lyra and the Feather of Light. The kingdom of Valeria had seen countless nights like this, crisp and cool, blanketed beneath a cloak of midnight blue. Yet, in the silence of this particular night, an unseen presence wove through the air, carrying with it a hint of something both forbidden and enchanting. It was the night of the Moonlit Festival, when bonfires blazed and the townspeople revelled under starlit skies. A night of music and laughter, filled with echoes of distant ballads and the scent of sweet spices carried on the breeze. While the townspeople celebrated, Princess Lyra wandered the palace gardens alone, seeking refuge from the festivities. She had always been drawn to the night's mysteries, captivated by the glimmer of stars and the eerie hush of a world half asleep. Her steps were soft, her gaze distant, as if enchanted by an invisible force that beckoned her to a hidden destiny. As she moved deeper into the garden, the sounds of laughter and song faded, replaced by the gentle rustle of leaves and the quiet murmur of a small pond, a secret place known only to her. She paused by the water's edge, her reflection barely visible beneath the surface. The air was still, the world holding its breath. It was then that she saw it, a soft glimmer, something radiant nestled in the grass beside her feet. It was no flower nor jewel, yet it glowed as if lit from within. Lyra knelt, her fingers brushing against it, and in that moment she knew this was no ordinary object. It was a feather, but unlike any feather she had ever seen. Golden, smooth, and cool to the touch, it seemed to pulse faintly, alive in her hands. Lyra lifted it, watching as the feather shimmered, casting a soft glow around her. It was warm, as though infused with a hidden fire, its light wrapping her in an unspoken promise. She felt a strange thrill course through her veins, an instinctive understanding that the feather had been left here for her. As she held it, a faint whisper seemed to brush against her mind, an ancient voice, lost in time, but stirring awake just for her. Only those who dare will see. The words lingered, echoing within her, filling her with a restlessness she couldn't explain. She turned the feather over in her hands, marveling at its golden sheen, each barb finely wrought as if spun from the light of the stars themselves. The feather seemed impossibly light, yet impossibly solid, its warmth spreading through her fingers and filling her with a sense of courage she hadn't known she possessed. Drawn by an inexplicable urge, she closed her eyes and clutched the feather to her chest. The night air around her grew tense, the silence thickening until it was almost deafening. A gust of wind rose from nowhere, swirling around her, lifting her hair, tugging at her dress, and then, as if pulled by an unseen thread, her feet left the ground. Lyra opened her eyes, her breath catching as she saw the earth fall away beneath her. The palace gardens, the ponds, the stone paths, all receded as she soared upward, carried by a force as gentle as it was unstoppable. Higher and higher she rose, past the spires of the palace, beyond the tallest trees. And still she ascended, weightless, her heart racing as the world expanded around her. In the quiet of the night, she hovered in the sky, held aloft by the feather's silent power. The kingdom lay stretched out below, its rivers winding like veins of silver, its fields glowing softly in the moon's light. The villages dotted the land, tiny clusters of warm light beneath the sweeping veil of darkness. She felt as though she were peering down on the world through the eyes of a creature born to the heavens. Yet, as she marveled at the view, her gaze drifted to the edges of her kingdom. Shadows loomed there, creeping tendrils of darkness where there should have been starlit skies. A chill settled over her, a sense of foreboding that pressed down like the weight of an unseen hand. It was as if the feather, while granting her this gift, had also revealed a truth she wasn't meant to see. She clutched the feather tighter, feeling its warmth pulse in her hand as though offering comfort. For a moment, the shadows at the kingdom's borders flickered, almost as if they had taken note of her presence, stretching out to greet her from the edge of the horizon. The feather pulsed in her hand, and a single thought, fleeting yet powerful, whispered through her mind. The kingdom needs you. And as swiftly as it had begun, the flight ended. The wind died down, and Lyra's feet touched the earth once more. She stood by the pond, the garden returning to its tranquil state, the feather still nestled in her palm. Yet something had changed. She could feel it in the way her heart raced, in the way her senses were heightened, attuned to the life around her. In that brief moment of flight, she had glimpsed not only her kingdom's beauty, but also a hidden darkness lurking beyond. The feather hummed, a silent reminder of the path it had set before her. For Lyra, the world would never again be the same. The golden feather had become an obsession for Lyra. Night after night, she returned to the pond's edge, drawn as if by an invisible thread, her fingers tracing the feather's fine filaments, each one delicate and aglow with a mysterious, otherworldly light. Its warmth comforted her, calming her restless spirit. Yet each touch also awakened a strange longing deep within her. a longing she could neither explain nor resist. The urge to fly again became a quiet whisper in her mind, growing louder with each passing day. She wondered if she could once again touch the sky, feel the wind wrap around her, and glimpse the kingdom from the eyes of a creature born to the stars. But it was not mere curiosity that called to her. It was the memory of shadows at the kingdom's borders, the strange darkness that had flickered in her vision like an unspoken threat. Every time her gaze drifted to the horizon, she felt that same chill, a creeping reminder of the unseen dangers that lingered beyond her sight. One night, unable to ignore the pull any longer, she returned to the pond. The world was silent, as if even the stars held their breath. She clutched the feather tightly, closing her eyes and letting her mind clear, letting herself surrender to the feather's quiet power. A familiar gust of wind swept around her, lifting her from the earth, and within moments she was soaring once more, weightless, as though she were part of the sky itself. Lyra rose higher and higher, the palace and gardens shrinking below, until they were no more than faint impressions against the dark earth. She marveled at how the world unfolded before her, a vast tapestry of shimmering rivers and softly glowing fields. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears, steady and strong, yet somewhere within it was the faint, pulsing rhythm of the feather guiding her. For a while, she drifted aimlessly, reveling in the beauty of the night, the thrill of flight. But then, almost instinctively, her gaze drifted toward the edges of her kingdom, where shadows had gathered on her first flight. To her surprise and horror, the darkness had spread. No longer confined to distant corners, it seemed to crawl closer, stretching like tendrils of smoke across fields and forests, swallowing the light as it moved. The feather trembled in her hand, almost as if it sensed her fear. She felt a stirring, a subtle tug, guiding her towards the shadowed expanse. Her pulse quickened, her courage wavering as she peered into the creeping darkness. What lay hidden within? What force could twist the beauty of her kingdom into something so ominous? Closer and closer she drifted, the air growing colder, the stars above dimming. And then, within the depths of the shadows, she glimpsed something. Figures, indistinct yet unmistakable, their forms shifting like smoke, with eyes that glowed like embers. They seemed to float within the darkness, their presence ancient and unsettling, as if they had waited an eternity for someone to find them. One of the figures turned, its gaze settling on her, piercing through the night like a blade of cold fire. She felt exposed, as though it saw not just her, but the very core of her being. Its eyes burned with a knowing, a silent recognition, as though it had anticipated her arrival all along. Lyra's breath caught, fear rooting her in place, as the figure stretched a shadowed hand towards her, its fingers like tendrils of mist reaching. But as the darkness encroached, the feather flared to life, casting a golden glow that cut through the night. The shadows recoiled, shrinking from the light, hissing as though wounded. The ember-eyed figure released her, its gaze lingering, intense and unbroken, even as the golden glow forced it back into the depths from which it had come. Lyra shuddered, pulling the feather close, her heart pounding as she hovered above the kingdom, alone in the vastness of the sky. The feather's light pulsed, steady and warm, offering her a comfort she hadn't known she needed. In that moment, she understood. This feather was not only her guide, but her shield, a protection against the forces that stirred within the darkness. It was both a gift and a warning. As she returned to the earth, her mind raced with questions. What was this darkness? And why had it chosen now to rise? Why did it cower from the feather's light? And why did the feather seem to hum with power? Only in its presence. She knew deep within her that her kingdom was on the brink of something unknown, something both ancient and terrible, and that she was the only one who could stand against it. The night had shown her more than beauty and flight. It had shown her the peril that awaited. She landed by the pond, the feather dimming in her hand, its warmth now a quiet reminder of the path ahead. She was no longer just a princess. The feather had revealed a purpose that had long been hidden, a destiny veiled in shadows and secrets. Lyra stood beneath the stars, her gaze fixed on the horizon, the darkness etched in her mind, unshakable. And for the first time, she felt the weight of her kingdom's fate settle upon her. A quiet but unyielding promise. The feather had changed her, binding her to secrets that now crept like shadows through her waking hours. Each night the kingdom grew more restless, the winds colder, whispering in the trees with a language she had only just begun to understand. And within her mind, veiled thoughts stirred, fragments of warnings and half-formed memories that drifted through her dreams. She knew they were not her own. They were glimpses, pieces of a past that belonged to the feather, to whatever guardian had once wielded its light. Lyra became a phantom in her own palace, her heart drawn again and again to the dark edges of her realm. She took to the skies each night, carrying the feather as both her shield and her guide, drifting farther and farther from the safety of the palace walls. And with each flight, the feather revealed new secrets, peeling back the familiar world to reveal something far older and more treacherous. One night, as she soared above the kingdom's quiet rivers and valleys, she felt the feather pull her towards a hidden grove, a place forgotten by time. Ancient trees rose like towers, their branches entwined, casting shadows so thick that the ground below seemed to breathe with an unseen presence. She descended, touching down on the soft earth, her steps cautious as she entered the grove. The feather thrummed with life, casting a faint glow that illuminated strange carvings on the trees, symbols she couldn't read but felt in her bones. A sudden whisper broke the silence, a low murmur that rose like smoke from the shadows. The language was foreign, but its meaning pulsed within her, sharp and clear. The Guardian's light has faded, the shadows draw near. The voice was ancient, weary yet unyielding, carrying the weight of centuries. She shivered, feeling the words etch themselves into her mind, their warning a mark she could not erase. The feather burned in her hand, its warmth urging her to press on, to uncover what secrets lay hidden in the grove. The symbols on the trees seemed to shift, their meanings flickering just beyond her reach. Yet one symbol stood out among the rest, a spiral wrapped around a flame. She felt its pull, an echo from deep within her, as if it were a memory of something once known and now forgotten. As she traced the spiral with her fingers, the grove shifted, and she felt herself pulled beyond the veil of the present into a vision of the past. Flickers of light and shadow danced before her eyes, and she saw a figure, robed in gold, crowned with the same feather she held. It was the Guardian, the spirit that lived within the feather, bound to protect the kingdom. The Guardian's face was obscured, hidden in the mist of ages, but she felt its purpose, its strength, resonating within her. The vision darkened, shadows clawing at the edges. The Guardian was not alone. Figures emerged from the darkness, faces twisted, eyes like molten fire, reaching for the feather with a hunger that felt ancient, primal. She sensed the Guardian's resolve, a fierce determination to hold the darkness at bay, to shield the kingdom from the shadow that lurked just beyond sight. But the vision fractured, slipping from her grasp, leaving only fragments of memory and a feeling of unfinished duty, as though the Guardian's spirit had passed its purpose onto her. Only those who dare will see. The phrase returned sharper, almost pleading. She understood now. The feather's power had weakened, its guardian worn from centuries of vigilant watch. And now, as the feather had found her, so had the shadows, sensing the shift in balance of power, creeping forth to test the limits of its light. Lyra staggered back, her heart pounding as she clutched the feather to her chest. The grove's shadows closed in, filling the air with a thick, clawing dread that threatened to suffocate her. She knew, without understanding how, that the darkness she had seen in her visions was the very same force that lurked at the edges of her kingdom, watching, waiting. Her encounters with the shadowed figures had been mere warnings, preludes to something far more dangerous, a storm building on the horizon. She returned to the skies, her mind racing, heart heavy with the weight of knowledge she hadn't asked for. As she rose above the grove, the feather grew warmer, pulsing in time with her heartbeat, as if trying to reassure her. But the weight of its power had become a burden, a constant reminder of the kingdom's fragility and the unseen dangers encroaching upon it. For the first time, she considered telling her father, sharing the burden that now weighed upon her. Yet the feather held her back, whispering in her mind a compulsion she couldn't resist. The guardian's duty was silent and solitary, bound by the laws of secrecy. The feather's voice, faint yet insistent, warned her that sharing its truth would only bring danger upon those she loved. The shadows, once aware of her revelation, would find her kingdom all the more vulnerable. And so she remained silent, the warning she carried locked deep within her. A silent vow between herself and the guardian's spirit that lingered in the feather's warmth. She knew with a clarity that cut through her fear that her path was set. She was bound not just to the feather but to the task it had left unfinished, to stand against the shadow that now stirred, and to be the light that would keep her kingdom from slipping into darkness. In the solitude of the skies, she felt the weight of her destiny settle fully upon her, binding her to the feather and the ancient vow it had borne for countless lifetimes. And in that moment, she knew there would be no turning back. The days turned to weeks, yet the shadow's presence grew bolder, weaving its way through the kingdom like an invisible mist, staining the edges of fields and forests. Though no one else seemed to notice, Lyra felt it, saw it, in the wilting of flowers that had once been vibrant, in the darkened rivers that now moved sluggishly, tainted by an unseen hand. She felt it most acutely at night when she roamed the skies, the feather warm in her grasp, guiding her toward the creeping darkness that edged closer with each passing hour. One night the feather's pull was stronger than ever before, almost insistent, tugging her towards the north, where the kingdom's boundary met the wild, untamed lands. The air was thick with foreboding as she flew, the feather pulsing with urgency, warning her of the danger she was drawing near. She gripped it tightly, steeling herself against the dread that gnawed at her courage. As she approached the border, she saw them, the figures she had glimpsed in her visions, shadowed forms drifting like smoke in the night air, their shapes barely human, yet unmistakably alive. They lingered at the edge of the forest, their eyes glowing like embers in the dark, watching the kingdom with a hunger that twisted Lyra's heart with terror. She felt the feather burn in her hand, a flame in the darkness. But the shadows seemed undeterred, their gazes fixed upon her, their figures growing sharper, more solid with each breath. One of the shadowed figures stepped forward, its form coalescing into something almost tangible, a cloaked silhouette with eyes that burned like coals, piercing and cold. It raised an arm and Lyra felt a wave of coldness sweep over her, a darkness so deep that it seemed to claw at her mind, filling her with a despair that threatened to drown her. The figure's voice echoed in her mind, a whisper edged with malice and ancient sorrow. You carry the light, but light alone will not save you. The guardian failed, and so will you." The words struck her like a physical blow, their weight filling her with doubts she had tried to bury. She felt small, insignificant beneath the shadowed figure's gaze, her own fear clawing at her heart, whispering that perhaps it was right. Perhaps the guardian's light was not enough to hold back the darkness that had now awakened, hungrier and more powerful than ever. But the feather flared in her hand, a sudden, brilliant burst of warmth that seared through the cold, dispelling the shadow's touch. The figure recoiled, its form wavering, but its gaze remained locked on her, its hatred seething just beneath the surface. It hissed, the sound like a storm, building within the night, and as it withdrew, Lyra heard its final words, a promise that chilled her to the bone. "The light may flicker, but the shadows will rise. When the last ember dies, we shall claim this realm." And then, as suddenly as it had come, the figure vanished, melting into the darkness, leaving only the echo of its threat lingering in her mind. She hovered in the night, her breath unsteady, her heart racing as the full weight of her task bore down upon her. She had always known, in some distant, unspoken way, that her duty was dangerous, that the feather was both a gift and a burden. But until now, she had not understood the depth of the threat that lurked beyond her kingdom's borders. Lyra descended slowly, her feet touching the ground near the border, her gaze fixed on the place where the shadow had disappeared. The feather's light had faded to a faint glow, its warmth a mere whisper against the cold that still lingered in the air. She felt the enormity of her task settle over her like a heavy cloak. The knowledge that she alone stood between the shadows and the kingdom she loved. In the days that followed, the kingdom began to feel the shadows' influence more openly. Fields that had once thrived now lay barren, their soil darkened and lifeless. Rivers ran dry, their once clear waters turned murky and thick. The people murmured of strange dreams, of whispers that drifted through their windows at night, filling their minds with fears they could not explain. Yet, no one knew the truth, the silent war that unfolded each night in the skies above, where a lone princess wielded a feather of light against an ancient darkness. Each night, Lyra returned to the skies, the feather guiding her, its strength waning as the shadows grew bolder, drawing closer, testing the limits of her courage. And each night she faced the shadowed figures, their numbers increasing, their malice sharpening, as though they sensed the weakening of the feather's power, as though they knew it was only a matter of time before the light faded completely. One night, as she soared above the kingdom, Lyra looked down upon the land she had vowed to protect. The villages nestled beneath starlit skies, the people who slept unaware of the danger that crept ever closer. The feather was a faint glow in her hand, its warmth flickering like a dying ember. She knew she had to find a way to renew its strength, to reignite the light that had once held the shadows at bay. But as the darkness thickened around her, she felt a chill seep into her bones, a feeling that whispered of a truth she had tried to deny. The Guardian's light was failing, and with it, the last barrier between her kingdom and the shadows that sought to consume it. And so, with a heavy heart, Lyra descended once more, the feather cold in her hand, the shadow's laughter echoing in her mind. She knew now that her journey was far from over, that the final test lay ahead, a test that would demand more of her than she had ever known. In the silence of the night, she returned to the palace, the weight of the feather in her grasp, a solemn reminder of the promise she had made. The kingdom's fate rested on her shoulders, and she would not, allow the shadows to claim it, not while a single ember of light remained. The kingdom lay heavy under a blanket of quiet dread. Each dawn arrived a shade dimmer, the skies pallid, stripped of their usual color. Rumors of failing crops, drained wells, and strange illnesses filled the air with a sense of unease. Though Lyra's heart ached for her people, she remained silent, bound by the feather's secrets, by the duty only she could fulfill. But she felt the weight of time pressing upon her, its urgency sharper with each passing day. The feather, once warm and radiant, had dimmed to a soft ember flickering weakly, barely more than a shadow of its former light. One night, as she held the feather and gazed out over her kingdom, she sensed something different, a calling stronger than ever before. The feather's pulse was faint but insistent, tugging at her, pulling her toward the sky, as though it knew the end was near. Lyra took a breath, steeling herself, and rose into the night one last time, her heart heavy yet resolute, her spirit braced against the storm she knew awaited her. She soared higher than she had ever dared, higher even than the stars, her kingdom stretching below her like a fragile tapestry on the verge of unraveling. The air was thinner here, the silence oppressive, the night holding its breath. And then, as she climbed toward the edge of the world, she felt it. A boundary, a place where the realm of mortals brushed against something other, something ancient and fierce. There, suspended between worlds, she found herself face to face with the figure she had glimpsed only in visions. A guardian, cloaked in a robe of gold, crowned with a feather as radiant as the sun. Its face was obscured by mist, features shifting like whispers lost to time. The Guardian's presence filled the air with a power that hummed, resonant and pure, a force older than the stars themselves. Lyra trembled, feeling as though she stood before the heart of the world, the very essence of light and life. The Guardian spoke, its voice both vast and intimate, echoing through her mind like a melody long forgotten. Princess Lyra, you have taken up the feather and borne its light with courage. But the time has come for you to understand fully the cost of its power. The Guardian's words were both a comfort and a warning, their weight settling over her, filling her with a sorrow that cut deep. She felt the feather in her hand begin to pulse, stronger now, its light rekindling as if drawing strength from the Guardian's presence. The darkness you face is an ancient hunger, a force that grows with every flicker of doubt and fear. It was once bound by the light of guardians before you, but time has weakened its prison. Only a heart unyielding and a spirit willing to sacrifice all can restore the light that once held the shadows at bay. Lyra's heart tightened, the truth dawning upon her like a cold dawn. She felt the Guardian's gaze upon her, soft and sorrowful, and she understood. Her strength alone would not be enough. The feather's light, the light of the Guardians, needed something more, something only she could give. If you choose this path, the Guardian continued, its voice gentle yet unrelenting, you shall become one with the feather's light, your soul bound to the kingdom's skies, an eternal watch over the realm. You will never return to the world below. Your life will be given to the light, and in doing so, the shadows will be held at bay, their hunger sated by the strength of your spirit. A heavy silence fell, the words lingering in the air like the final notes of a song. Lyra's heart ached, torn between duty and the life she would leave behind. Yet, as she gazed down at her kingdom, at the villages nestled beneath the starlit night, at the people who laughed and dreamed and lived unaware of the darkness looming, she knew there was no choice at all. Her love for her kingdom was a fire too fierce to be extinguished, a light that would outlast even her own life. She nodded, her resolve firm, her heart calm. As the feather pulsed, warm and steady in her hand, the Guardian's form glowed brighter, filling her with a radiant warmth that banished all fear, all doubt. Then go, Lyra, daughter of light, and may your spirit be the shield that guards this kingdom. May your sacrifice be the light that endures. The feather in her hand blazed, its light consuming her, filling her with a fire that burned away all weakness, all fear. She felt her soul lift, her body dissolving into the golden glow, merging with the feather's essence, becoming one with its power. In that moment, she became light, a part of the sky, a silent guardian bound to the stars. Below, the shadows writhed and hissed, retreating as the feather's light flared to life, casting the kingdom in a glow so brilliant it seemed to banish the night itself. The darkness recoiled, vanquished, its hunger sated by the strength of her spirit, bound now to the feather's eternal light. And so, the kingdom was saved, its skies watched over by a princess who had given all, a quiet, enduring flame that would hold back the darkness for all time. Lyra's memory became a legend, her spirit a whisper on the wind, a star in the night, forever guiding, forever guarding. In the silence of the night, when the stars are bright and the winds gentle, some say you can still feel her presence, a soft warmth, a quiet comfort, the light of a princess who dared to soar.